Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Monday morning, it is Jerusalem Day, celebrating the reunification of the holy city of Jerusalem, which was occupied by Jordan for around 20 years from the rise of the modern state of Israel back in 47-48 until 1967. Also, what's going on with Israel's coalition talks in the Knesset? Rumors say that they're close to forming a government. I have my doubts, but we'll see. Will a government be formed? And if yes, what might it look like and who would be in it? We're going to be talking about those two subjects today. But first, starting out with a news story, we started out this holiday on Monday morning with a big bang, so to speak. A little after 6:20 this morning, Israel time, red alert sirens went off in Jewish communities in the Gaza Belt area. This after a previous rocket attack on Israel's south Sunday night, just several hours before, including a relaunching in the last few days of incendiary balloons sent from the Arabs in Gaza to try to set blazing fires in Israel and its fields and communities. With this morning's rocket attack from Gaza, reports Monday morning say that there was a successful interception. There were no injuries from this latest rocket attack and no damage to property. Thank you, God, for protecting us. At this stage, there is no change in the routine for civilians. Schools will remain open and operate as usual, though the south of Israel and the holy city of Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria are on high alert today after continuous attacks by Arabs, and people should be careful when traveling on the roads in these areas. Hoping for a quiet day today and a joyful day ahead, I want to wish you all a happy Jerusalem Day, and do not let the enemies of Israel who want to harm innocent people, do not let them get away with it. Do not let them ruin your day. And the government, or the lack of government, whoever's still leading us, has to put a stop to this. We'll be right back.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Monday, Jerusalem Day, celebrating the reunification of the holy city of Jerusalem, which was occupied by Jordan, the Jordanian Arabs, for around 20 years. Remember when the Berlin Wall fell and everybody was so happy that East Berlin and West Berlin were reunited? And for Jerusalem, all the more so. So we're going to be talking about the history of Jerusalem Day. We're going to be talking about the violence that has been going on in Jerusalem and Israel's south the last few days, and now even Judea and Samaria are on high alert as well. Our guest is Barry Shaw. He is the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. His books include Fighting Hamas, BDS and Anti-Semitism, and 1917 From Palestine to Israel. They are available on Amazon or at the local Steinmetz Szymanski bookstores in Israel. You can visit his website at theviewfromisrael.com and strategic-israel.org. Welcome to the show, Barry Shaw.
Hi, Tamar. Thank you for having me again.
I am happy to have you on. It is Jerusalem Day today, Monday, as this show is going live. And all over the news, they're showing pictures of violence happening on the streets of Jerusalem, especially near the Old City. And the Old City, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, is where all of the holy places are for all three religions of Christianity, Judaism, of course, and then Christianity, and then Islam. And we see also rocket fire. A little bit after 6:20 this morning, there was more rocket fire on the south of Israel, followed by previously a rocket fire last night, Sunday night in Israel. So where would you like to start, Barry?
Well, you're right. I mean, what we're seeing at the moment is a tinderbox lit by the Palestinians to cover their own failures. And now we're hearing on foreign news channel that Israel must impose calm on Jerusalem, as if we're the ones responsible for initiating the violence in the first place. And then once again, foreign governments and the media gaslight the situation, hide the guilt of the different Palestinian factions and blame Israel. And it's time this false imagery has to stop. And it's time responsible journalists and diplomats step up and tell it as it really is, not as they would like it to be. So I'd like, with your permission on your show, to lay out exactly what's going on here, Tamar, and give a precise history of recent events and tie them to their origins.
Go for it.
So let's talk about the recent violence. It began about 2 weeks ago after Mahmoud Abbas called off the Palestinian elections once again. I mean, he's been calling off elections ever since he lost the first one 15 years ago and assumed the mantle of president of a non-existing state. And remember, he lost control of Gaza after a bloody civil war. And this time, after he saw that not only would his corrupt, impotent party lose to Hamas, but that his own position as president of the Palestinian Authority was under serious threat from opponents such as Mohammed Dahlan, and even more by an imprisoned mass murderer, Marwan Barghouti. So what did he do? He called off the elections and blamed Israel for not allowing Jerusalem to vote in Jerusalem, and competed with Hamas by calling for violence. So actually, when Hamas began to stir up emotions against the Jews, there was, if you remember, there was an outbreak of violence in Jaffa. You may recall that there was an incident of local Arabs beating up, first of all, a rabbi, and then another attacking young yeshiva students in Jaffa in hate crimes against Jews. They filmed these attacks and they uploaded them on TikTok. And so this violence attacks against Jews spread to Hebron and to Jerusalem and other places. And when that happened, both Hamas and PA linked these anti-Semitic attacks to the failed elections. That's basically the start of the tinderbox. And in order to pin the blame on Israel, Hamas began firing rockets from Gaza into Israel and now started launching their explosive balloons. So they called on Arabs as well in Jerusalem to show their feelings. Remember, we're talking now, Tamar, at the period of Ramadan. So to counter the Hamas offensive, which began at the start of Ramadan, Mahmoud Abbas had no choice but to rival Hamas by blaming Israel on all sorts of false charges. The fact that the Israeli police, if you remember, had placed barriers outside the Damascus Gate entrance of the Old City, that was to allow access to worshippers to go into the Old City to pray at the mosque on the Temple Mount, but also to stop young Arab men gathering in numbers before or after prayers. And the police knew, the security knew, that the imams and the hotheads would be inciting violence against the Jews. And they wanted the men and the people to disperse rather than to gather outside the Damascus Gate. So in order, the protests began, so the barriers that maintained law and order were removed. But it was already an excuse to ignite the violence against the police and any Jews that were in the area. And we saw that the police removed the barriers as the Palestinian Authority demanded that the violence became even more unmanageable. And as I said, it's easy to incite violence during the holy month of Ramadan. And they couch it in religious terms against the Jews. Again, another anti-Semitic act that makes for violence, to make the matters worse. And other issues are taking place at this time, Tamar. An eviction order has been placed on a number of Palestinians who had been squatting illegally in houses that didn't belong to them. They belonged to Jews in what the Arabs call the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of Jerusalem. You know about that neighborhood, Tamar?
Yes, of course. I used to travel there all the time.
Well, your listeners are going to hear in the foreign media, they're calling it a crime of occupation, or Israelis driving Palestinians out of their homes to extend occupation of Palestinian land. So here's some historic truth of what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah. More correctly, it's known as the neighborhood of Shimon HaTzedek, right?
Shimon HaTzadik, yes.
HaTzedek. We hear about Jews occupying this location. Originally, Shimon HaTzadik was a Jewish holy site that included the tomb of Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the Righteous. He was a high priest that lived in Jerusalem in the Hellenic period of the Second Temple. And he's mentioned in the Talmud as someone with high position who even welcomed Alexander the Great on his arrival in the land of Israel in the 4th century BC, Tamar.
Right.
Next to the tomb is a cave of the Sanhedrin, where the Jewish judges were buried. And throughout history, notable people recorded their visit to this holy place. In the 19th century, during the Ottoman period, it's recorded that this place was a popular Jewish pilgrimage site, especially during Lag BaOmer, similar to the recent festivities on Har Meron, Mount Meron. And it's this Jewish holy site fell under Arab ownership until 1876, when some Arabs bought up land around there. But even at the time, it was more known for Jewish festivities that were going on. And also at that time, there was peace going on, because the Muslims would come every year, the Watch of the Jews, celebrating the Lag BaOmer ceremony at that time in the area of Shimon HaTzadik. But the Arab during the Ottoman period called the place, the Arabs themselves during the Ottoman period called the place Al-Yahudiya, the Jewish place. In 1976, the Sephardic Jewish Council and the Ashkenazi General Council united and for 16,000 francs jointly purchased the site of the tombs as well as 17.5 dunham, and it was registered with the Ottoman authorities in the name of Rabbi Abraham Ashkenazi, who had been born in Turkey, by the way, as well as representatives of the Sephardi Jews and the Ashkenazi community. And in 1890, a cornerstone was laid to the start of construction of a neighborhood known as Shimon HaTzadik. And in 1891, more Jewish construction began west of the Nablus Road and the Shimon HaTzadik tomb. And it was called Nachalat Shimon, to build homes for underprivileged Jews, refugees from Georgia and Yemen. And in total, 260 people lived there with 4 synagogues in 1916. And in 1918, the Zionist delegation headed by Chaim Weizmann funded the development of the tomb and a residential area. And during this period, 1920, and this is where it starts to get sinister, notable Muslim Arabs in the area, people like Haj Amin al-Husseini, the notorious Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, decided with others to build their homes in this area. Why? Because it has become, thanks to Zionists and Jews, a well-developed area. But what happened then when the Jordanians invaded, when the Arabs decided to annihilate the nascent state of Israel in 1949, the frightened Yemenites and the Jews that were lived there were driven out of their homes, both by the Jordanians and by attacking Arabs, and their homes were taken over by Arabs from 1949. And during the period of the Jordanian occupation of Jerusalem, you may remember that all the Jews of Jerusalem, and we must remember that Jerusalem had a majority Jewish population, they were driven out of Jerusalem by the Jordanians, leaving no Jews in Jerusalem.
All right, let's hold it right there because we have to go for a break. And you've established basically that all of these places are Jewish. The Arabs came in and occupied it. The Arabs are occupying Jewish areas. This is where King David ruled and King Solomon. This is where our history is. And these Arab interlopers came in and are occupying these places and claiming it as theirs. We're going to be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. It is Jerusalem Day, Monday morning, starting out with a bang, literally, as attacks from the Hamas in Gaza attack Israel's south. There has been chaos on the streets of Jerusalem, especially in and around the old city of Jerusalem where the holy sites are by the Arabs on their Ramadan festival as well, and even high alerts now in Judea and Samaria. And Barry Shaw is our guest today, and he's talking about the history of Jerusalem, modern day and ancient times, and establishing that this is Jewish land. This is where our kings ruled. This is where their graves are. Jerusalem has been the capital city only throughout all of history, only for the Jewish people. No other occupying forces that came here ever made Jerusalem. They say it's such a holy city and it's theirs. They never cared about it. They never made it their holy city. All right, Barry, continue.
Right, so just rounding this out, and I'm talking about the historic and the legal aspect of what's going on and what they call Sheikh Jarrah, which is the Shimon the Righteous area. So we came to the point where actually Jordan occupied Israel, a part of Jerusalem, which was declared Israel's capital before that. But in 1956, under the Jordanians, 28 housing units were built for Arabs as a project between Jordan and the UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. In exchange for the homes, Arabs had to relinquish their refugee status. In other words, the UN and Jordan were creating facts on the ground, although at that time, the Arabs referred to themselves as Arabs and not Palestinians. But however, going back, as I said, that total the area and the neighborhood were under Jewish ownership by either Jewish trusts, said by the Zionist organization or whatever. And the properties were occupied illegally by the Arabs during the Jordanian occupation. And therefore, when Israel fought back and reclaimed the area, we have a situation, a legal situation, that the homes that once believed to belong to Yemenite Jews and other Jews were now occupied illegally by Arabs who hadn't paid them, hadn't bought them, weren't paying rents or anything, but were sitting there and refused to leave. This court case is going on today. And there are properties there that belong to Arab because they bought the land from Arab owners, or they were given to them by both the United Nations and Jordan. And it's difficult. This is another legal claim. But this is a situation that's going on right there. And in 1999, the Jerusalem court was given evidence that the property had Jewish ownership. And they ordered in 1999 the evictions of an Arab family that had occupied actually parts of the area of the compound of Shimon HaTzedek. which was being used as a yeshiva and a pilgrimage place. But you had Arabs living there who had no rights to ownership whatsoever. And that legal battle is going on today. So when you hear about it's the Jews driving out the Palestinians from their homeland, I ask your listeners to take it in its historic and legal context. And this legal context brings us up to, when we're talking about Jordan, brings us up to Jerusalem Day, which, as you know, Tamar, we're coming into Jerusalem Day when the whole area of Jerusalem and other places is a tinderbox right now. And what's supposed to happen today, as we're about speaking here, is there's going to be a celebration in which Jews celebrate Jerusalem Day by going into the old city up towards the Western Wall in celebration, waving, of course, Israeli flags. So what we're seeing is the anti-Semitic violence we've experienced the last 2 or 3 weeks when Arabs have been attacking Jews all over the place. This is going to be a tinderbox today. So let me talk about the history of what Jerusalem Day is all about.
Please.
We celebrate Jerusalem Day because it celebrates the liberation of Jerusalem from the Jordanians in 1967. I raise the point here over there that ever since Jordan occupied Israeli territory by coming over the River Jordan and making their way and occupying all part of the area known as Judea, Samaria, the Jordan Valley, and Jerusalem, up to the time that we were able to drive them back when they tried to continue to defeat and annihilate the rest of Israel and lost. The liberation of Jerusalem from the Jordanians in 1967. This was at a time when combined Arab armies from 5 countries tried to, again, attack and destroy us. Remember this. So when the Jordan armies came over here, they didn't claim the land for the Palestinians from 1948 to 1967. They kept it for themselves, just like the Egyptians when they attacked the south and took Gaza and other parts of southern Israel. They didn't give it to the Palestinians either. They kept it to themselves. When the Syrians attacked over the Golan Heights, they didn't want to give that land they conquered to the Palestinians. They kept it to themselves. So let's cut out this bluff that the Arab armies were trying to defeat Israel because Israel was occupying some land belonging to anybody else. There wasn't a Palestine.
Right, and there weren't Palestinians. The Palestinians were Jews. My father was here in pre-modern state of Israel. He was living here under the British mandate. The Palestinians were Jews. The Jerusalem Post was the Palestine Post. If you called an Arab a Palestinian, he would take umbrage to it. He was either an Egyptian or a southern Syrian. And the Palestinians meant you were Jews. It was only in 1964 that they flipped it and all of a sudden stole, not only did they, or occupy that name, because they had to show, oh, it's ours. You know, they had to show proof that they have roots in this land, but they didn't. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. The Palestinian Football Club and the FIFA was a Jewish league of football. The Palestinian Bank was a Jewish bank. Anyway, this time, before the Jordanians came, as I said in the first segment, Jerusalem had a Jewish majority. What did the Jordanians do when they conquered the old city? Thank goodness they didn't get further than the old city, but the old city was enough. And this is a perfect example of what the Jordanians did. They evicted every Jew who lived in the old city and marched them out of the house, not to return until 1967. They then destroyed every synagogue, every yeshiva, every Jewish place of earning. They took over all the Jewish homes and gave them the Arabs to live in. They destroyed all the Jewish places. They turned to the Western Wall to the Temple Mount. It was called the Wailing Wall then, and turned it into a urinal. They removed
a urinal.
Graves. What?
A urinal. They would pee. They would pee
Yes,
there,
that's
and
what
they
I
would
said.
throw their garbage there to show their disdain for anything Jewish. Go ahead.
Yeah, and they removed the marble gravestones from the Jewish cemetery on the Mount of Olives to pave pathways to the old city so the Arabs could walk on Jewish gravestones. Then they made a fatal error. because they decided to join in the war with Egypt and Syria, made a military pact with them. And by 67, we had trained our forces, knowing that the Arabs wanted to annihilate us, and we were ready. The Jordanians were driven out of the old city, out of Jerusalem. They were chased east and didn't stop, and then they had run back across the Jordan River. Not only was Jerusalem back in our hands, but so was Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley. But Jerusalem was the crown and the symbol of Israel's rightful and legal return to the land. And this is the reason we celebrate Jerusalem Day. And the Arab world, in the main, is silent. The modern Arab states these days have now come to realize we're here to stay. And the post-war 1967 Arab League Khartoum resolution of the infamous 3 no's, no peace, no recognition, no negotiations with Israel, is a sad fallacy of the fact and the past. And now we have the Abraham Accord, including with Sudan, which was the country in which this diplomatic Khartoum failure actually happened. So I'm calling on the diplomats or anybody listening to this to get with it, get real, realize the truth, and don't base your policies of the Middle East of Israel having to withdraw. What, you want us to withdraw from Jerusalem again because we're occupying Palestinian land? Give me a break. So Jerusalem Day this year, with the violence we can expect this year, is a symbolic reference point to the world. It's a stubborn international diplomatic community can try to resurrect 1967 as their ultimate aim. They will fail to take on board that 1967 will never happen again, because we have the scars to show what a dangerous, foolish notion it is.
Well said, Barry Shaw. All right, we're going to be going to a break in just another minute. Barry, I know there's so much history and there's so many facts to give out, but I do want to address the issue of what is our on the news headlines today, and that is that they're claiming that Lapid and Bennett are just about to form a coalition government. I want to talk about the coalition talks, what we might see. Do you believe that they're going to be really successful in doing this? And if they are, how long would a government like that last? We're going to be talking about all of this when we get back from the break. But again, reminding everybody that they should be careful on the roads if you're traveling in Judea and Samaria, because the Arabs are attacking Jews with rocks, with surrounding cars and beating them, with crowds, with incendiary balloons in the south of Israel. And also it happens in Judea and Samaria as well. So if your kids are playing outside and they see a balloon, warn them never to go towards a balloon. It's a terrible thing to have to tell a child that, and to always call a parent first if they see any balloons, because they could be bombs, they could have fire lit near them, etc. We're going to go to a break right now. We're going to be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Ben-Tekoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
Well, the headlines on Arutz Sheva at least, but I saw it in the television news this morning as well. They're claiming that a coalition agreement between Bennett and Lapid and other parties might be reached within the next 24 hours. I highly doubt that. I have been wrong before. I could be wrong, but I highly doubt it. They say senior opposition officials say that they're on the verge of a breakthrough in talks for an alternative government deal, and it may be ready within the next 24 hours. Here to tell us more about what's happening with the coalition talks, we have as our guest Barry Shaw.
Right. Okay, we're talking about the elections. Well, Israelis love elections. We can't get enough of them. We've had 4 of them the last 2 years. Are we going to be on our way to a 5th? We'll find out in the next week or 2. But Tamar, I want to start off by putting my thoughts to you and your listeners of why we're in this state of this election. I put it down to something I call Bibi's hubris. Externally, he was a global figure, thrusting Israel obviously on the world map as a prominent, successful country. But internally, Bibi, if you look at it politically, internally, was a divider in chief. He divided the country politically. Israel is still a majority center-right country. But how did this play out in the last election? 7 of the parties who ended up with Knesset candidates are on the center-right. 1 is center-left. 1 represents the Orthodox Mizrahi Jews. 1 represents Orthodox Ashkenazi Jews. And 2 represent the left. And 2 represent the Arabs. As I said, the country is a predominant center-right. So why have we fractured? Bibi's hubris, Bibi's political tactics over the years to divide and rule and to dominate the political seats. And he left himself isolated. He left himself alone. If you just go back at some of the people that were tied to him, Avigdor Lieberman broke away from a Bibi government. Then Yair Lapid broke away after being a minister under Bibi. Then Gideon Sa'ar left the Likud because he can't work under Bibi. Then Naftali Bennett. Then Benny Gantz. Even Bezalel Smotrich, because although being claimed to be from the right and said he represents the Jews of Judea and Samaria, he really deserted them from time to time. Also, Benny Gantz, despite being granted a rotational prime ministership, he left Bibi claiming that he couldn't work with him, couldn't be trusted. And the signs were there years ago when the pillars of the Likud, even people like Benny Begin, the son of Menachem Begin, left the Likud party. Dan Meridor, Moshe Ya'alon left the party because they didn't like his style of domestic internal leadership or the way that they saw him taking the party. And that's the reason we were in this mess. In the end, it left him isolated. He withdrew to Balfour Street, the fortress that's the Prime Minister's residence, with a growing crowd of protesters outside his door every night. And people felt that he failed them over Israelis left rotting in the hands of Hamas or former Israeli soldiers suffering from post-trauma mental problems, or people who have been damaged, left behind economically from Bibi's lockdowns and his dismissive, coercive measures through the pandemic. They left people who are not prepared to bow to his COVID dictates, feeling like pariahs, outsiders in a society. And things like this. Internally, he was damaged goods. And then that was before we came to the court cases and the legal constraints put on him. And this left him devoid of the numbers, really, to cling on to powers. And we saw this even in his private life, where he had influential friends from abroad. They deserted him from one after the other. Basically, we keep hearing rumors or stories about favors being sucked out of them, like champagne, cigars, clothes, jewelry for his wife, the First Lady, from people like James Packer, Sheldon Amelia Adelson left him, Arnon Milchan deserted him. And these were the things where we began to see the fall of Bibi. And in the end, he was forced to negotiate with media moguls for positive domestic publicity. And this has led him to fight for his reputation, as he has accusations of or charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in court. You can say he's innocent. He was pursued out of power. Maybe quite right. We hope he is found innocent. Then he can maybe find his way back. But the result of this hubris has led the country where we are right now. So let's turn to see what happened post-election. once the results were in, it was clear that the Likud couldn't govern with only 30 seats, and they had to gobble a coalition. The problem is that too many of the parties of the right, were supposed to be his side of the political agenda, were people who had experienced Bibi and refused to work with him again. As I said, Gantz, Saar, Lieberman, Bennett. Only Smotrich said he would serve under Bibi on the condition he wouldn't make any overtures to the far left or even to the Arab parties. So only Bennett at the time was prepared to negotiate with Bibi. And in the end, he turned his back on him as well. Basically, there was a lack of trust shared by these politicians. So this is where we are today. So now we have negotiations going on because Bibi was forced to return his mandate to President Rivlin. And now we have Lapid putting together or attempting to put together a coalition. Don't forget, he has to have at least 61 supporters. And we come down to a numbers game. Now, the media is saying that there are talks as we talk this morning on Jerusalem Day, that Lapid, maybe with Bennett and others, could be forming a government within a week. We have to see if that happens, Tamar.
All Bibi needs to do is to prevent, put a stick in the wheel. How do you say that? There's a saying about that.
Spoke in the wheel.
Yes, thank you. And stop them from being able to form a government, which shouldn't be too hard. And then we go to fifth elections, and then Bibi's got another chance to be able to come out the winner, and he remains the prime minister in the meantime.
What's been going on is that the members of the Likud are trying to, as you say, put a spoke in the wheel by trying to look for weak points in any of the parties to draw out one or two of the politicians from the other parties,
of which there are plenty,
not support it.
Yeah.
Let me just give your listeners a brief profile of Yair Lapid, because who is Yair Lapid? Really, he gains attention to the Israeli public as a TV personality, to basically because his camera-friendly face and charisma. He's not tall. In fact, he's small, very small in height. You know, Tamar, I don't know if you heard about that. There is a joke that it's true that when he met Joe Biden, then Senator Biden complimented him on his head of impressive gray hair. This is a balding, I guess, say Biden. And Biden told him, if I had your hair, I would be president of the United States at that time. To which Yair Lapid responded, and if I had your height, I would be president of the United States.
The grass is always greener on the other side.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if you know this also, but Yair Lapid grew up in London. His father, Tommy Lapid, was working there in London for the Mariv newspaper. And when his father returned to Israel, Yair spent his time in the company of journalists in Tel Aviv meetings, you know, in the bars and the clubs and things like that. And his mother, Shulamit, became a respected author. And he mixed with the literary crowd. And as a TV personality, he became the enemy of the religious community. He was speaking up against the religious community. It remains what he's going to be saying these days if he wants to attract some of the parties, maybe the United Torah or even Shas, into his coalition. Not sure if that's going to happen.
Right. The religious parties don't want to sit with him.
Yeah, but it may be a bit more outreaching today towards them. But now, because now he sees himself as being a lightning rod to attract all the politicians that have been harmed maybe by Bibi. So will he succeed? Well, he's got 3 weeks perhaps to do it.
Do you have any predictions you want to make?
Yeah, well, he calls his government the government of change. In actual fact, it's the government of revenge, because if he's going to put a party together with people like Gantz and Bennett and Lieberman and Saar, and these people basically are, as I said, they were with Bibi, now they're sort of anti-Bibi, so they would be joining in it. But let me put it this way: if he creates a coalition, although he will have maybe parties like Labour and Meretz, and Lapid, his own party, which is, they called it centre-left, most of the spine of that party will be right-wing parties, basically. But even if we put those parties together, my figures only have him up to 58. Now, if they're doing backroom deal with the Ram Party,
which is the Arabs,
they have, through Mansour Abbas. If Mansour Abbas is projecting himself to put his the aims and the ideology of his Islamic Party to one side and really become the representative of the Arab communities to give them the security. There's a lot of violence going on in most of the Arab towns right now, where the Arabs themselves are demanding that the Israeli police open up more police stations and give them the securities they need from their own violent population over there. He may want to somehow be involved in that in order to give a bit more prosperity and security to the Arab population in Israel. And let's face it, they are about 20% of the population, and they deserve security.
Yeah, but that's what a normal person would do. But the Arabs are so consumed by their hatred of the Jews that it overrides their rationality and what's best for their own people. And we've seen that time and time throughout the modern history with the Arabs and the Jews.
I don't believe he's going to go in as a formal party in a 62-seat coalition government. I think what's going to happen is perhaps that Lapid is going to come together 58. That's short of the majority. But
okay, we have to leave it there, Barry. We're at the end of the show. We shall see what happens. Thank you so much for joining us.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.